Hi everyone, welcome to Fan Nation Level Up Your RPG with Morgan Conroy. My name is Cecilia. I'm one of the librarians here at the Ocean County Library in Toms River, New Jersey. Joining me today in the chat is my colleague Amy. So it is my pleasure to welcome Morgan Conroy. Thank you for joining us today, and please introduce yourselves.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me, and welcome to the people who have joined in and are listening to this. My name is Morgan. I am a D&D podcaster. I am a game streamer on Twitch. Currently in our second campaign of our 5e actual play podcast, Taking Initiative. And I do a whole bunch of different stuff on Twitch with various different RPGs. I consider myself to be very much a role player at heart in the game world, and I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, and we're glad to have you. We're going to do a brief questions about your history with tabletop RPGs, some questions about role-playing in general, and then some of your favorite aspects of the game or any games you're excited about.
Absolutely.
So up first, we have, what was your first tabletop RPG experience and how did it make you feel?
Sure. My very first foray into tabletop games was actually a World of Darkness game that was ongoing with a group of friends. I was only visiting and they looped me in for a couple of sessions while I was staying. And it was the first time that I ever had any sort of experience with that world of role-playing games, and it was very exciting. It was very cool. And then I leave. I couldn't stay with that campaign. I moved back to New York, and I tried again to do a tabletop game where I had someone who was like, I want a DM. We're going to play 4E. And then we had 2 hours of character creation in which everybody's souls left their bodies.
4E is tough.
4E is tough. 4E is tough. And it was something that kind of turned me off to the whole process because I was like, oh, if this is what it's going to be like, I don't know. And then a couple years after that, I ended up getting back into that world where someone was like, hey, I've got a 5e campaign. I promise the character creation is not like 4E. Let's loop you in. And once you finally find, and I say that just to kind of preface where some people's first RPG experience is the most magical thing in the world. And they're like, this is what I want to do forever. And it's incredible. And other people's first RPGs experiences, I don't get it. I don't get why this is the thing. All that to say, it really depends on the people that you have this experience with. Some people are, just starting out, or the vibes are not good, as the kids say, does not pass the vibe check. And that can make for an experience that is not so great. So my point to say is keep trying with TTRPGs because maybe it's just not the one for you, but it doesn't mean that the whole world is closed to you. Because I had some discouraging starts, but once I got into it, once I found a system that worked for me with a group of people that worked for me, I mean, it became one of the most pinnacle parts of my life and has been for the last couple of years.
You definitely have to have the right vibe at the table.
Got to pass the vibe check. Yeah.
And a good DM or GM is also key, I think.
Yes. And on that note, just to kind of briefly, immediately torpedo your interview list, but a good GM is not just somebody who is I think in the world of RPGs, a lot of chatter is going on about Critical Role, which is a hugely popular D&D 5e professional quality D&D game that is streamed on Twitch. They've got an animated series coming out. They've got a lot. And the GM of that game is named Matthew Mercer. He is a professional voice actor. He is a professional storyteller. He's a professional and he is a wonderful person. Everybody starts their GM experience differently and everybody has to start somewhere. A good GM does not mean that you can do 16,000 different voices and, be professional quality, but a good GM could be someone who's very active at listening and responding to player needs and saying, "Okay, that didn't work. Why don't we do that?" Like, flexibility is probably one of the key GM. So, anybody who's just starting out and are, like, tuning into this to think, "Oh, I wanna get into RPGs, but I'm scared of GMing because maybe I'll never be good." You can only get better if you start and you do it, and don't be afraid of learning and making mistakes as long as you're flexible and you learn from them.
Yeah, every GM kind of has their own unique style too. I've been noticing that watching more and listening to more stuff. So everybody has like their quirks, and some people
Mhm.
don't even try to do different voices. They just dive in and just do characters and
Yeah.
whatnot.
I think we're gonna go a little bit further into, like, role play itself, and I'll go into that a little bit, but I immediately diverted us from the path of the
That's
interview
fine.
question, so we can go back to that.
It's an organic conversation.
Organic. There we go. We're doing it live.
So what games are great for first timers who want to get into tabletop RPG? Do you have any
Yeah,
recommendations?
absolutely. So, probably the most popular tabletop game that people know of is D&D, right? It's the most common, I would say, that people have experience with. And honestly, 5e, 5th edition is probably the easiest entry point. It has a lot of structure. The rules are pretty clear. There are starter kits. I think they sell them at Target now as well, but, like, you can get them
Barnes&
pretty
Noble?
availably. Barnes& and Noble at your I don't know, do you have them at your local library?
We do.
Oh,
We
fancy
have
that.
the player's handbook, we have the monster manual, and then we have some campaign guides too. I
Perfect.
know I think the latest one we got was the Candlekeep Mysteries, which came out, I believe this year or last year.
Yes, and
But we get them
Candlekeep
in all the time.
has a couple of, like, different what they call one-shots, which are, like, self-contained little, like, things. And I would recommend if you're interested in tabletop games, you don't really kind of know where to get started, there's a lot of support and resources for D&D right now. So it can be a very good entry point into this world. And then from there you can say, what about D&D do I love? What about D&D that I don't like? And then you can kind of start poking at different tabletop games and saying, what are those aspects that I want to pursue out of that and look at different systems because there are so many tabletop systems out there. Big retailers, you've got your Modifiuses, you've got D&D, you've got Pathfinder, you've got Call of Cthulhu. Those are big popular ones that you can find very easily. There are also so many independent RPG makers that are doing their thing and are creating really, really wonderful games. So getting your foot into the door with 5e is a really good start because there is a lot of structure, it does a lot of hand-holding, and then from there, you can jump right in. Quickly on that note as well, one-shots are a great way to start in 5e because they're self-contained, they are just like you don't have to worry about, like, a lot of tabletop games are like campaigns in which it's multiple sessions and you do many great things, but also it has a lot of downtime and there's a lot of planning and a lot of scheduling involved. One shots, you can say you can plan with given enough time, you could do it with an hour or 20 minutes. And I know some GMs who are wizards that can just be like, oh, you guys want to play? All right, let's go. I'm going to improv this whole thing. Crazy people, but they happen and they're good and they're amazing at it. And what that is just like very contained. You have a group of people. What are you doing? We're going to end in about 2 hours or 3 hours or however long this one shot takes. But it doesn't continue past that point unless you want to pick it back up. So, one complete story arc, get your toes in the water. It doesn't commit you to a huge, long thing.
What types of games encourage role playing in their system?
Ooh, I would say that my experience Modifius and the 2D20 system very much allows you to play characters that are very diverse, and you can have a lot of role play moments within that. I'm gonna keep comparing to D&D just because it's a really popular one. D&D originated as a, like, war games game, so there's a lot of combat in it, and even if you want to play D&D where you don't do any combat, you can do it. It's sort of set up in a way that encourages combat to progress and to do, like, big story arcs and those kinds of things. your character is also kind of set up from the way that D&D is operated as someone who has the ability or capability to do like violence or a combat situation. And in comparison to that, I was in a Conan the Barbarian game, which you might imagine lots of warrior type stuff happening, barbarians. I played 15-year-old girl named Cornelia who barfed every time she saw blood.
God.
She was not a combat character. But the way that the 2D20 system and the Conan game was set up was that your combat characters are kind of designed just to like mow down enemies. And they can do that without getting overwhelmed, but still feel like they're triumphant and powerful in a moment. But it means that if you have a character who's not combat focused, like many times I was like, oh, there's combat. Cornelia's got it. She's gonna hide. She gotta go. She can't. She's a kid. There's swords happening. She reads books. She's a student. She has no idea how to do any of that. So that allowed me to play that character without making it feel like I was being a burden on my party of like not participating in the combat, which in a lot of D&D, if your character's not participating in combat, it feels like you've got like a weak link in your party. So I found enormously that Modifius, the 2D20 system, allows you to have a lot of flexibility in how you're role playing and creating characters that are not necessarily just combat heavy, but have a diversity of skills that they can approach to a situation.
Awesome. And you said Conan the Barbarian.
Conan the Barbarian is from Modifius. I've also played in the Star Trek. They're piloting their Star Trek RPG right now. I play an engineer.
Nice.
I have never fired a gun or a phaser in that. I solve all of my problems with science. And that's how Gideon rolls. That's my character. She would never think that the phaser is her first option. She's always thinking in a way of like, how can I use my skill set to get around that situation? So a very interesting and fun character, and I'm given a lot of leeway with that system. I will say that the 2D20 system it takes a little bit to get your head around, but not a terrible system. Very, very cool.
Awesome. So now we're going to move on to talking more about role-playing in general in the game and becoming your character.
Yeah.
What does creating a character look like to you? Where do you start? Do you have like an idea in your head, or do you create at the table with everybody else?
I tend to shamelessly steal from other IPs.
I think everybody does that.
Yeah, and it's an easy way to start, especially like if you like a character, a character that you like, you can easily just plunk that character into a campaign. I had a character that was heavily based off of Tahani Al-Jamil from The Good Place. We were playing in a very dark and spooky setting, a campaign module called The Curse of Strahd, which is a D&D 5e. Very spookums, very scareums, very difficult. And I wanted to play a little ray of sunshine, a little naive girl. So I very much played Tahani Al-Jamil in D&D. I've played various different like concepts from TV or books that I've pulled in where I say it would be cool if I could have a character that was a loudmouth like that. And I'll usually start with base character from a TV, film, book, or whatever that I like, and then I will adapt it and evolve it. I will say that very often when you're building a character, you kind of have in your mind of who this person's going to be, and then you start playing them and they turn into someone totally else. And it's okay to evolve with that, right? Like in my current campaign for Taking Initiative, we're doing Storm King's Thunder, which is a very lengthy travail through giants and dragons and all sorts of stuff. And I really thought I was about to play some like super cool, like unbothered, like super hot lady who had all the girls pantsing after her. And then I started to play Surreal and I was like, oh no, she's a nerd. Like she's really awkward. And I it just became very organic of, like, what I thought Surreal was gonna be ended up being the perception that people have of her that she's kind of uncomfortable with, where she's like, um, "That's not who I am. I'm someone different." And I think that you should, when you're building a character, don't be afraid of that evolution because it really does turn into something that feels very organic and natural to play, as opposed to trying to force something that doesn't quite work.
I feel as like you're playing and interacting with every NPC or characters, you kind of react as the character as well. So you don't know until it actually happens in the game.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a certain level of yourself that goes into every play, like every character, right? I tend to be more of a mom player where I'm like, guys, murder is not the option here. You put that back. We're not stealing. Like, I tend to be more of the lawful, good type where I have friends who are pure chaos demons. And so, no matter what character I'm playing, there's always a little element of that that kind of slips in because that's just me playing that character. There are moments where you can swing in the other direction of that, where, very common in RPGs, you'll hear people be like, "I'm gonna do this because that's what my character would do," right? And that move is usually a jerk move. It's usually something that is very disruptive to a table or will cause a lot of conflict or strife because somebody thinks it'll be funny. I would say that anytime you approach a character, you wanna play it authentically, but you also need to be mindful that tabletop games are a collaborative storytelling moment. It's not just you doing what you want for your story. If that's what you wanna do and you don't want any input, you need to write a book. I support you. May you eventually have that book in your local library where you can check it out. But tabletop games are collaborative, which means that everybody has a stake in the story, and you have to have that flexibility to say, I kind of want to do this, but what impact does that have on my overall party? Am I willing to accept those consequences? You can still do the move. Oh, you can totally do it. But don't be surprised if it ends up having a negative consequence in game for your characters and for your party. And also that your party outside of the game might say, that wasn't cool. What happened to us? We're all part of this. So just be mindful of when you're playing a character. Don't try to excuse a behavioral thing with your, like, oh, that's what my character would do. Be mindful of it. Like, yeah, my character would do this, but I'm going to own it, you know? So that's just a mindful thing. Like, play your character, try to be authentic about it, but keep in mind that everybody's here to play a game, right? And that's the other thing. This is a game. It's a fun time. It should be fun. It should make people feel really good about the story. And that story can sometimes be sad or frustrating or heartbreaking or any parts of those real narrative moments. But it's a story and it's a game. And everybody should come out of that experience feeling good about the experience that they've had.
Can you talk about some easy ways to improve your gameplay or your role playing?
Sure. I normally start with my characters as those base TV concepts, and then sometimes I make a Pinterest.
I love Pinterest
I
for
make a
making
mood
characters.
board, right? I kind of find things that when I look at them, I go, "Ooh, that's surreal," or "Ooh, that's Charlie." Those are the things that kind of make me feel that character. I know some people get really into making like Spotify playlists for their characters of like hyping themselves up as to like how that character feels and what their backstory is and how they approach situations. So those are all really good things to like help you get into like a visual mindset and a sort of mood mindset for your character. I also am a big fan of answering questions about your character. There are all sorts of meme questionnaires of like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite book? Or what's a childhood event that was important to you? Write those questionnaires out as your character. That flushes them out into so now they're not just, this is Bob. he's a rogue and he likes daggers, right? Like that's a starting place for sure, right? But you can say, all right, here's Bob. He's a rogue. Why is he a rogue? What about his life up to this point allowed him to have that skill set? Especially if you're starting as a level 1 character, you're really not like the big bad of the town. You know how to lockpick, and also that's it. Like that's you don't have a lot of those like big top tier skills. So you think, okay, I'm starting out as my adventure as Bob the rogue. What about Bob in his life led him to this? Was he a kid who really liked secrets and liked to try and find out? So he's an inquisitive person. He likes to find the root of things. He likes to know things. Or is he someone who's got sticky fingers? Like he's a little kleptomaniac. He loves the shiny things. Did he have a life or a home where he didn't have a lot in his life? Did he have to look for food? Is this an Aladdin type kid? Right. Those are questions that you can ask yourself and start thinking about and really kind of develop a character so that when you're in your collaborative storytelling and somebody asks you about your backstory, you're not just like, he likes fish. Like it can stall out, right? You want your characters to feel like people and to feel real. And that having that kind of fleshed out, it might seem silly to be like, why does it matter what my character's favorite color is? For my Tahani Al-Jamil character, her name is Charlotte, her favorite color was yellow, and it's because it made her feel like the sun, it made her feel shiny and bright and fresh and joyful, and those are those things that I had to think about and say, "Why would that matter for a character?" And it's those moments that kind of fuel internally how she reacts with the world and how her interactions with different characters feel. So, fleshing your character out, you do not have to go to the extent that some people I know, our GM of my current game right now, Jonathan Bucksmaster, he makes full novellas about his characters. I'm the same type. I got a Google Doc, I got 20 pages of what my character or backstory. You don't have to do that. But having a good idea of a sketch that you're willing to kind of fill in or develop really goes a long way to feeling like your character is a genuine and authentic experience at a table.
So we talked a little bit about creating your character. So during gameplay, how do you stay in your character and stay in your character's mindset?
Yeah, it can be hard, right? And I think especially when you're first starting out, don't be afraid of just falling out of character. You'll get back in. Going back to like how you are developing your character, having those values and D&D generally has like an area in your character sheet where you kind of figure out your values or things that are important to you. Those are important because that allows you to kind of think about how would I react in X situation? If you have somebody who does not care about theft, they're like, "Okay, whatever. That's not a value of mine. Take what you can. We're going to go full Pirates of the Caribbean pirate here." They're not going to be bothered by a situation where a theft happens. But if you're playing a character, or it's me and I'm your mom character, and I see a theft happen and it's against something that I feel like was not deserved, you're going to have a conflict in game of, hey, we don't, hold on now. It informs the way that you would do things. But also, I sometimes have the conversation with myself where I say, Morgan is upset by that. Surreal thinks it's a great time, right? Or Morgan personally would never do that. We're down to play as Charlie. She's totally good with it. So, knowing your character's values allows you to stay in character because you can make decisions as them instead of yourself. But yeah, sometimes it's hard. And I know, we're talking about like I do a lot of character voices as part of my thing. It can be hard at first to stay in your voice as well. My personal trick for that is that I have to think in it for a little while. I have to kind of change my thoughts as to sounding more like that character. It's especially good if you're basing your accent off of somebody else's. Just listen,
Right.
pop up a YouTube video, Be like, I want this to sound like, oh God, what's really good? I want to sound like Waluigi. All right. Just an hour long compilation of Waluigi so you can get your whas, as perfect as possible. Once you listen to that thing over and over again, your brain starts to pick up on it and will start to think in it. So if you're doing like an English accent, very classic, tabletop gaming accent, put on British TV. There are plenty of shows on Netflix or on YouTube that you can just listen to English people talk. And over time, you can start to think of, how do I pronounce this? How do I do this? And kind of start to think on it and then go from there.
You find yourself practicing when you're out and about or just by yourself in a room?
I'm terrified of having to go back to the office. I'm working from home right now because I practice voices all of the time to myself in front of my computer. I'll read emails in little voices, like, today we need to pull this report for this reason. And because we need to pull this report for that reason, I need to go to this website. And because I need to go to this website, I need to go here. I will do that all day if I'm given the chance because it's fun, right? It makes work interesting. And when I was in school, when I was taking classes, I would sometimes pick a passage of the book I had to read and I would read it in an accent or I'd read it in a voice just to kind of practice it and see how it sounds. Also, a lot of the times, the first time you do a voice, it's not the best version of it, so you gotta workshop it a little bit. You gotta kind of tweak it. I'm trying to do a very Helen Boehm Carter voice, and I'm not perfecting it yet. I gotta really practice it. So, like, those things you kinda have to work at. I do very much recommend picking something and just reading it in the voice that you want to practice it. So, yeah, I'll do that all the time, and I do silly voices. Like that's a thing I grew up with. I'm a middle child. I'm the only daughter and I've got two brothers, so there was a lot of times growing up where like just sibling stuff, like people fighting or you took this or I've woken up this Tuesday and I do not like your face. That kind of stuff growing up when you're you've got siblings in a family that's close and stuff. And part of the way I used to conflict resolution is that I used to make my brothers laugh with like silly voices of, "Oh no, you can't do that to me because I'm the cutest person you know, and I'm sorry if you don't like my face today, but that's your problem." Like I used to do all of those kinds of things just to make them laugh and kind of diffuse situations that way. So it was very natural for me to like do different voices and why like tabletop games sort of appealed to me where I could like practice and focus and I don't know, have fun with this little talent that I had.
I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but
Mhm.
do you have any other ways a GM could encourage role playing in their games?
Oh, yes. I've been very blessed with a lot of really excellent GMs over my experience. I will give you this example as a thing to avoid. All right. My 4E experience was with a guy who had a very set idea about how he wanted things to happen. And once we were like, "Hey, we want to do this thing," he was like, "You can't do that." And we were like, "Why not? Is the door stuck?" And he was like, "No, but you're going to need that thing later on, so I can't let you destroy it." Your party doesn't know that, right? Like, and you got to have the imagination to like let your party make mistakes. You can help guide them after that, but never put something in your game where your players, if they break it or chuck out the window, your story stalls out. Because I'm guaranteeing you guys, your players are going to break the thing. If you have something like that, players are magnetically attracted to messing up your vibes with that. They will just do it. We don't know why. We're like cats with a glass of water on a table. That thing's got to go.
Well, like you said, flexibility is key. So if they
Flexibility.
break the thing, pivot, do
Pivot.
something
Yeah,
else.
pivot. Don't be afraid also to sometimes things will happen. I'll give you an example. I was running a game, a Humblewood campaign, which is where you play as adorable little woodland creatures. And my friend was playing as a raccoon character and they got eaten by a giant toad. Not a big deal. They could get out, except they then reminded me that they had about 15 flasks of explosive material in their, like, fanny pack, and I was like, "Oh,
Interesting.
okay. Let's roll to see if they explode." And they're level 2, and I was like, "I don't wanna kill my friend's character. We just started. This was supposed to be a fun romp, guys, with a massive explosion because my friend decided it would be funny to have a like explosive pedaling raccoon character, which she was right. It is funny, but not in that moment, right? And I had to pivot. I had to say, okay, how can I adjust the situation where I say, it would be funny if this exploded. Let me see if I can say, your fanny pack dislodges from your attempt. You kick it down into the gullet of this toad. It blows up, and you are cartoon style flung into a tree. You
Perfect.
survive,
Cinematic.
but I gave him a little bit of a consequence of it. I was like, your hearing is just not right afterwards. You've got tinnitus like you wouldn't believe. Just to make it feel also like I wasn't giving them this for free. I was giving them a little consequence to it. Be flexible about things. Give your players time to talk and to breathe, and don't feel like you have to be like your mom on vacation. We've got an itinerary. We got to go here. We're going to go visit your uncle, and after that we're going to lunch, and after that we got like you're allowed to let your characters and your players have moments where they just sit at a table and talk. And giving them the times where they don't feel pressured, like, "Oh, we gotta go. Mom's gonna be mad if we're not at lunch this day." Like, giving them the time to explore their characters and talk to the other players and develop those relationships is really important because then you get a really cohesive party where they don't all have to be friends, by the way, but you have really rich relationships, whether those are negative relationships or positive relationships or potentially like romantic relationships. All of those things are allowed to develop with time and opportunity. I've had great GMs who are great about setting up a situation and then sitting back and they don't talk for 20, 30 minutes. They're like, "All right, tell me what you guys do." Give
Those
them
are
the
the best.
space. It's wonderful because you really feel like you get to be your character and you get to flex and you're not just here to roll dice and then punch a number, you know? The math rocks are very fun. I have many. But if the game was just throwing math rocks, I wouldn't be into it, right? The whole point of this is that I get to be somebody else and that person gets to live different situations and gets to run through a bog, but I don't have to deal with mosquitoes. Those kinds of things. I get to experience something. I get to find out things about myself and about other characters and stories that I wouldn't have the opportunity to otherwise. So, as a GM, your role is to give the setting and the narrative points, but allow your characters and your players to really fill out how you get from point A to point B. You don't have to have it all scripted. That's your novel that you're going to eventually get in the library, right? How you get from point A to point B really depends on where your party goes, and allowing them to make choices and make mistakes and get consequences and have the time to kind of figure themselves out as people really gives you a very rich and developed world to kind of play in. Those are the most rewarding experiences as a GM.
What are some of your favorite moments from some of your tabletop role-playing games?
Yeah.
Anything that sticks in your mind?
I've had some really good ones lately on my Star Trek stream. That's my engineer character. The 2D20 system allows you to roll a lot of dice and to feel very powerful. And you get these things called momentum where you can add more dice to keep your momentum going, right? I had a moment with Gideon, my engineer. She had made friends with this ancient AI robot, and she had the critical moment of things were failing, things were bad, and this AI robot was like, "I can integrate your organic and my technical experience, and we can become basically a cyborg." And having that choice of like, "Oh man." Morgan, who is a big weenie when it comes to horror and like any of those things, I was like, I would never do that. But Gideon is, I can like barely talk about Gideon without doing her voice, which talking about basing them off of other people. If you've ever seen She-Ra's Entrapta on Netflix, Gideon's voice is very Entrapta from She-Ra. Really like the kind of raspy vibes, the weird Midwestern-y kind of thing, big exaggerated sounds. Love Gideon. Gideon was all for it. You get so much knowledge that way. You open up your mind. You get to do all these things. Having that divorce of like Morgan, like, ugh, and Gideon, like, yeah, like that was a very fun experience for me as a player. One of the most profound experiences I had as a player is I started in taking initiative as the campaign was already going. I came in as a new character. It was like my second character ever in 5th edition. I was super excited. I think we recorded 2.5 sessions and my character died. And it was really sad. And it was a really sad moment for the whole party because it was one of those things where we had consequences. There were warnings from the DM. Hey, you guys might not be ready for this jelly. And we were like, we're ready for this jelly. What's up? We were not ready for the jelly. We're not ready for the jelly.
That was Curse of Strahd, which is
that was Curse of Strahd. Curse of Strahd is very unforgiving when it comes to misinterpreting what jelly you are prepared for. And we ended up almost losing our entire party. And the only reason why we didn't lose our entire party is that one person got thrown out a window and was outside of the house where there were vampire spawn. And the other person started their turn outside of the door. The 2 other people that were in that room got wrecked. And there was nothing the party could do about it. There was nothing we could do. And there was a moment of that narrative where it was so heartbreaking and it was so, you felt so powerless in the moment. And it just felt like, oh man, even to this day, I feel that little like, depression when I think about Roz, because she was such a cool character and I barely got to play her. But from that, I had to think, this is going to change the whole game. Prior to this experience, the 2 people in that party hadn't really had such a level of loss in their story. And now 2 of their party members, a longtime friend and this newcomer that they had sort of taken responsibility for, totally wiped out. And it completely changed the direction of the story. It changed the direction of one of the players where they thought their character was going. Someone who was usually kind of happy-go-lucky and kind of joyful and a little silly became more serious and more thoughtful about those things. And coming back in, I came in as Charlotte, as my Tahani Al-Jamil character. That was really what inspired me to come back as such a sunny character, as someone who was absolutely positive about everything, because it allowed me to bring this new element into the story. So it was a game-changing event. It was really sad for me, a real big bummer, but like also such an incredible narrative storytelling moment that we all just had to sit back and be like, dang, that's so cool. It's unfortunate, but it really did make for an incredible moment in this collaborative storytelling situation. That one's a little not as recent, but one of the most profound experiences that I had in a tabletop game.
Do you have any favorite podcasts or streamers in the community that you would like to plug?
Sure. I mean, so my podcast is Taking Initiative. We have 2 seasons out right now. I will give you a heads up. Strahd is a little rough. It's got a lot of elements of gore, and I think we have some trigger warnings on the start of episodes where things do get a little insane. So just as a heads up that for content, and then we're got Storm King's Thunder, which I would say has a generic adult themes of language and sometimes sexual jokes in, as a heads up just to the general audience of teens. So Taking Initiative, I'm very proud of. We've got great friends in the podcast community, and I will say that the tabletop community as a whole is one of the most welcoming and friendly communities that I've ever been a part of. You've got The Last Refuge, which is a very funny, wonderful podcast which is 5e. You have the Broadswords, which do a mix of homebrewed 5e with their own system. There is Nerds on a Roll, which is a tabletop for Masks, which actually I didn't talk about, which I should have. Masks is all about teenage superheroes who are coming into their own and finding their footing. Great system. There are D20 Dames, which is a family-friendly 5e podcast. Yeah, so there are lots of different avenues out there. Two of the most popular ones are Adventure Zone
Same.
by the McElroy brothers. You can find that on I think Spotify and a whole bunch of other different podcast networks. They're very funny men. You've also got Critical Role, which is an incredible entry point into the whole world where it's done by people who are very good at what they do. I believe that's in podcast form. You can also find it on YouTube. Very easy to watch and to listen to in the background. There's a whole world out there. And if you think, I want a D&D podcast or I want a tabletop podcast that does this, a couple of Google searches can probably get you what you're looking for. There's such a wealth right now of people who are playing games and sharing it. So I highly recommend just Googling it and seeing what pops up and giving it a try.
Yeah, I definitely think there's been a boom since COVID and quarantine. Who doesn't want to play games while they're stuck at home? They can play over Zoom.
Right? Yes. I'm very into that. There's so many accessibility things. There's a program called Roll20, which you can log into online. It gives you like a virtual map. It allows for a visual aid. For the 2D20 system, there is Fantasy Grounds. It's a little outdated, but it's still a very good platform to run a game through, which does a lot of the like math side of things for you, which is quite nice. D&D Beyond allows you to have virtual character sheets and do encounter building, which allows for a lot of the guesswork taken right out of it and allows you to kind of build balanced combat situations. Or if you're like me and you're recording a podcast and you are the worst about rolling your dice on your basically your mic stand, so it makes a horrible noise. There's a virtual dice roller that makes it quiet and you don't have to do any math. So there are a lot of different options. There's a lot of different avenues. And if you Google accessibility things for D&D, there are just a bajillion things out there right now. It's very cool.
Awesome. So we're going to open up. If you have any questions, put them in the public chat. In the meantime, I had some questions writing up. What are some ways to encourage your fellow players to role play with you? If you want to do a scene or anything.
I think just making the effort to have the Shakespearean aside where you kind of pull one character out and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. And it can be, hey, this battle is, or like the situation we're in has been really stressful. And I know I'm kind of struggling with it, and I just kind of wanted to get your read on it. In character, that gives you an opportunity to sort of talk to your fellow players. It can be from whatever situation you're in. If it could be something funny, it could be something, serious. Critical Role, the person who is very, very good, if you want to see an example of this as you watch or as you listen, Liam O'Brien on Critical Role is very, very good about doing like little one-on-one asides. So like at the end of a night where people are bunking down or like going to their hotel rooms or whatever, he's very good about pulling someone aside and being like, hey, I want to talk to you about this. And it gives a moment for that one-on-one time to develop something, either a conversation or a character beat or something like that, to give them the opportunity. And it might be that the other player is like, I don't want to talk right now, bye. But if you're persistent about it, or if you keep encouraging those moments, I feel like the opportunity will be taken at some point. I also think the other thing is that there's a level of silliness about RPGs where like you step outside of yourself and you're like, we're a bunch of adults talking in silly voices, pretending to be elves.
Rolling dice to see if the thing
rolling
happens.
dice and then doing math to have fun. And there's an element of that where like, this is really silly. And I think there's a level of, I don't want to look dumb, or like that self-consciousness that can kind of prevent you from like really committing. I would say the best moments that I've had, the funniest, most heartfelt moments that I have had in tabletop games is when people commit and really don't let that little voice of like, this looks silly, push that aside, commit to the bit, and really own it, because that does make for such a like really cool, powerful moment in a game where like later on you'll be texting your friends and be like, I can't believe, you won't believe what happened. I have to spend 15 minutes explaining the setup because this person isn't in the game and I have to set them up. But then Thistle told me that this was happening and it was like, what? And I was like, yeah. So like it's like watching, it's like making your own movie or your own favorite book with people that you like. It can be incredible and it can be very powerful. So there's a level of doubt or there's a level of self-consciousness that can eat in. I think it's fair to take that little self-consciousness and be like, I love you. Goodbye. I'm owning this. So commit to the bit and don't be shy about it. And if somebody at the table feels like they're reserved, just create a safe space, set your boundaries, say, hey, we're good here at this table. Here are the things that we like to do. If you're not comfortable doing it yet, we can maybe get to a place. What would make you more comfortable doing that? Communication is key. If I haven't said that yet, communication is key. Establishing expectations or like boundaries or what we all want to achieve as a goal here. It not a goal of like we want to defeat the dragon, because obviously we all want to defeat the dragon, or we want to make friends with it, or some people want to be boyfriends with it, and that's perfectly fine with them. That is like a party goal in character. Out of character, your party has to ask, what is our goal here as a group of friends who are creating a story together? Are we here just to have fun and do whatever? Are we here to make a meaningful story? If you have somebody in your party who is like, I really want to have an incredible, moving, emotional character beat, and you are pairing that with someone whose entire character is based off of something like Farts McGee, where their superpower is that each of their farts has a very different spell component to it. Like, those don't necessarily mesh. They can.
May not belong in the same game.
They may not blend in the same campaign. But setting up your expectations of a player who really just wants to have a good, goofy time and play the silliest, weirdest character, and a person who is very much looking for their Strider to Return of the King moment, those you need to set up at the very beginning so that nobody feels like they're getting left behind in a campaign, or that the story doesn't include them, or they're not able to do the things that they want to do because the tone doesn't match them. I know, crazy, but talk to your other players, talk to your GM. Your GM probably has in mind what kind of story they want to tell. One of the one shots I was in, the whole thing was that there was a talking sheep that was a wizard that was stuck as a sheep, and we needed to figure out how to fix him. And because we set the expectations of that this was a silly one shot that had no consequences, did not end up helping that sheep. We absolutely were like, okay, we're helping you up to a point, but then there was a dragon and that was too real for us. So deuces, we got to go. That was a fun, silly time. That was a lot of fun for everybody because everybody had the same expectations in it. That situation in another game where we had the expectation of like, this is a serious campaign. We want people to have the full narrative, emotional ride in it. It would be a different thing. So set expectations, talk about what kind of story you want to build, talk about what kind of character you want to make, how that would vibe into that campaign or with your other players. Always good to kind of touch base of like, hey, oftentimes you'll hear when somebody's building a party or campaign is, hey, we got a rogue and we got a druid and we need somebody to be a tank and we need to be a healer, right? You're setting up for a World of Warcraft raid and you have specific slots that need to be filled. Your tabletop game is not like that. You can have a party that is all bards. It will be the most fun wild ride you've ever had, and you might die because you don't have a lot of like combat strength. But if your GM's with you on that, hey, we're gonna have an all bard party. Great. You are a traveling band. Your problems will be anywhere from your roadies got drunk and, left all of your equipment someplace, and now you have to go to all these different places around town to where your roadies were drunk at and see if you can find your equipment back. You can make the game what you want to make it. Just set your communication and set your expectations from the start of it.
Did you ever have a moment or talk a little bit about if you have like an issue either with a player or a character, how to handle if something happens in game and how to handle it in a gentle way out of game. I know those are hard moments too.
Those are hard moments. I will say part of setting expectations as you start a campaign is that a lot of people have what they call safety tools. And it is a way to set up when you're playing a game. Sometimes people get really immersed, they can be in a moment, and then something that can happen that really, like, in-game and out-game crosses a line. And those are moments that can happen very accidentally. There's no malicious intent there. But there's a definite moment of like, I'm having a good time, I'm not having a good time. Talk with your GM or with your other players. If you're not a very confrontational person, I'm a very loud person, so I'd be like, I'm not having a good time right now. Can we can we pause? I'm the kind of person that will speak up about that. If you're a person that does not like confrontation in that way or feels weird about it, there's an X card system where you can just have a card that has an X on it and you can hold it up like, nope, I'm done. And that will indicate your GM of like, we need to fade to black. We need to pause for a second and reassess. Having a signal system or a system to indicate what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with is a very good way to make sure that everybody at the table continues to have a good time when certain sensitive issues happen or when something can go wrong. Inevitably, something will cross the line for you at some point. I highly recommend that you don't just sit on it and don't just say, I didn't feel good about that, but everybody else was having a good time. In tabletops and in real life, do not do that because all you're doing is hurting yourself. Either you can say, hey, I got to take a break. This is something that I'm not feeling good about. I'd like to pause. I want to kind of reassess how we're going to approach this. I don't want this included in further games. And if you have somebody who's really insistent about crossing your line, don't play games with them. You don't have to. It's a game. If you're finding that like a game is making you uncomfortable over and over again, stop playing that game. You don't have to. And if everybody else is having a good time, great. That's a game for them. It's not a game for you. I've had moments where we had a situation in a game where we were recording with guests, people we didn't know quite as well. This was our big mistake. We did not set expectations at the start. A topic was brought up that we were all kind of like, oh, this is a joke. It was not a joke for someone. And we had to stop and say, okay, let's go back. We'll change things. Own it. You don't it's not like it happens. If you're the person who crosses the line, you can just say very easily, I'm very sorry. That did not intend to do that. I understand why you're feeling that way. Moving forward, we won't do that. Own it, change it, adapt, flexibility. From a player standpoint, from a GM standpoint, probably the best advice I can give for tabletop games.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And there are a lot of safety tools. I know Lines and Veils is one of them. And
yes,
X card, great systems for letting people know comfort levels.
And you can Google safety tools and there are a whole bunch of resources that will pop up.
Well, thank you so much for being part of Virtual Fan Nation 2021. Yay. If you want to plug anything, now would be the time to do that.
On Taking Initiative, which is a podcast you can find on Spotify and I think pretty much anywhere where you find podcasts. Yeah. My Star Trek game, which is for the most part family friendly, is on the Gamers Table Twitch, where I play Gideon the Engineer. And I don't think I have anything else further to plug at this point, except to thank you so much for having me on and for giving me the opportunity to talk. And thank you to the people who joined to listen and to the people who will listen to this later down the road. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being a part of this. Be sure to check out the Ocean County Library website and YouTube channel for additional Fan Nation programming. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening, morning, wherever you're listening to this. Have a great night.
Bye.